A plane crash stranded Avery Collins with the most ruthless Mafia boss in Boston. But when rescue finally came, Mason Kane refused to leave without her. The shocking part was not that he was willing to die on that island. It was that 6 days earlier, Avery would have gladly watched him disappear. She knew what it felt like to beg someone powerful for help and be treated like her pain meant nothing. She knew how hatred could become armor. But on a forgotten stretch of coast surrounded by burning wreckage and a rising storm, the man she believed had no heart became the only person standing between her and death. This is not just a story about survival. It is about the difference between protection and control, hatred and grief, love and surrender. Stay until the end. Like the video and comment where you are watching from. 6 days earlier, Mason Kane had not looked like a man capable of begging anyone to stay. He had looked exactly as Avery Collins remembered him, untouchable. The first cargo horn sounded across Boston Harbor just after 7 in the morning, low and mournful beneath a sky the color of steel. Cranes lifted containers above the water while trucks crawled through the gates of Kane Atlantic Logistics. Men in reflective jackets shouted over reversing alarms. Salt diesel and cold wind moved between the warehouses. Avery crossed the employee parking lot with a coffee in one hand and her laptop bag pressed against her side. She had slept 4 hours. Her mother had called at midnight because the radiator in their apartment had started knocking again. Avery had spent an hour convincing her that the noise was not dangerous, another hour reviewing quarterly reports, and the rest of the night staring at a ceiling she could not afford to replace. It was an ordinary morning. That was what made it cruel. Ordinary mornings had a way of hiding the moments that divided a life into before and after. The black vehicles arrived as Avery stepped into the lobby. 3 identical SUVs rolled to the curb. Their windows were dark. Their engines remained running. Conversation inside the building thinned. A receptionist lowered her voice. 2 shipping supervisors moved away from the entrance. A man from legal stopped laughing in the middle of a sentence. Mason Kane stepped from the second vehicle. He wore a charcoal coat over a dark suit, no tie, no visible weapon. He did not need one. 2 men followed him through the revolving doors, both broad-shouldered, both scanning the lobby as if every potted plant might conceal a threat. Mason did not hurry. Power never did. Avery turned toward the elevators before he could see her. "Good morning, Miss Collins." His voice reached her anyway. She stopped with one finger above the call button. "Mr. Kane." He came to stand beside her. Up close, he looked less like a businessman and more like something the city had failed to bury. His hair was dark, his eyes almost black, his expression calm in the way deep water was calm. He glanced at the second coffee in her hand. "Planning a difficult morning. One is for reception. You buy coffee for reception. They answer calls from angry people all day." It seemed kind. His gaze lingered on her face. Kindness was apparently a foreign object to him. The elevator doors opened. Avery stepped inside. Mason followed. His security men remained in the lobby. That surprised her more than it should have. The doors closed, leaving them alone inside the mirrored car. Avery watched the numbers rise. Mason watched her. "You sent a report at 2:17 this morning. I assumed you were awake." "I was." "Of course you were. You found irregular payments connected to the Miami acquisition. I found payments to a company that barely exists. There is a difference. Only to lawyers." The corner of his mouth moved, but not enough to become a smile. The elevator stopped on the 22nd floor. Avery stepped out. Mason stayed inside. "My office. 9 o'clock. I have a departmental meeting." "Not anymore." The doors closed between them. Avery stared at her reflection in the polished metal. There it was. That effortless assumption that other people's lives would rearrange themselves around his will. She took the second coffee to the receptionist. "Is he in one of his moods?" the woman whispered. "He only has one mood." "That is not true." Avery looked toward the elevator. "You're right. Sometimes he is slightly more unbearable." At 8:58, Avery entered Mason's office carrying a folder thick enough to make her wrist ache. The top floor looked nothing like the rest of Kane Atlantic. There were no bright lights, no cheap carpet, no framed posters about teamwork. The walls were dark wood. The windows stretched from floor to ceiling. Boston Harbor lay beneath them, broad and gray, filled with ships that seemed small from that height. Walter Briggs sat near the conference table. He was in his 60s, silver-haired, lean, and always dressed as if he had just left a private funeral. He had worked for Mason's father before Mason was old enough to understand what the family business truly was. Walter rose when Avery entered. "Ms. Collins, Mr. Briggs." Mason stood near the window with one hand in his pocket. "Close the door." Avery did. She remained standing. Mason looked at the folder. "Explain." "No good morning. You already had one. You deciding that does not make it true." Walter's eyes shifted between them. Mason extended his hand. Avery placed the folder on the desk instead. 3 maintenance payments were routed through the Miami Port Development account. Each one went to Caldera Aviation Services. "I know the name. You know a name. There is no real company behind it." She opened the folder and spread several documents across his desk. "The registration is 8 weeks old. The listed office is empty. The phone number connects to an answering service in Delaware. No employees, no equipment, no recorded contracts before hours." Walter leaned closer. "How much?" $240,000 divided into amounts small enough to avoid automatic review. Mason's expression did not change. "Who approved them?" "Your aviation department processed the invoices. Final authorization came through operations." "Name?" Avery looked at him. "You have the same report I do." "Say it." "Richard Vale." Walter became still. Richard was Kane Atlantic's chief operations officer. He had been with the company for 14 years. Mason closed the folder. "Who else knows my supervisor saw the entries? Anyone outside accounting?" "Not from me." Mason turned toward Walter. "Find out who Richard spoke to this week." Walter nodded once. Avery crossed her arms. "You think this is more than fraud?" Mason looked at her. "I think fraud is rarely lonely." "Then call the authorities." Walter gave a soft, humorless breath. Avery looked at him. Was something funny? No. It sounded like something. Mason moved behind the desk. "The people handling the Miami acquisition do not involve authorities unless they are forced." That is a strange way to describe a port contract. It is an accurate way. Avery already knew Kane Atlantic operated in places where legal business and criminal influence touched each other. Everyone in Boston knew. The newspapers printed polite words. Federal investigations opened and closed. Men who testified changed their stories. Rivals disappeared from industries they had dominated for decades. Still, Mason had kept the corporate offices clean. At least clean enough for people like Avery to pretend their salaries came from shipping containers and customs forms alone. She tapped the folder. "If these payments connect to the Miami deal, postpone the meeting." "No. You have not even reviewed everything. I will review it on the plane." Avery frowned. "What plane?" "Ours. I am not going to Miami." "Yes, you are." Walter looked down, perhaps to hide his reaction. Avery laughed once, not because it was funny. "No." Mason's gaze settled on her. The room seemed to contract around them. "The meeting is tomorrow morning. We leave at 4. I am an accounts analyst. You found the transactions. I can explain them from Boston." The people we are meeting do not trust electronic communication. The people you are meeting sound exhausting. They are. Then take someone from legal. I need the person who found the pattern. You need control. Mason's voice stayed quiet. Sometimes they are the same thing. Avery felt heat rise beneath her skin. She knew that tone, that calm certainty, that refusal to recognize another human being's right to say no. A year earlier, she had stood in this same room with rainwater on her coat and terror in her throat. Her mother had collapsed in a grocery store. The doctors found a dangerous blockage and scheduled emergency surgery. Insurance covered most of it, but not enough. Avery needed time away from work. She needed money before the hospital would confirm every part of the procedure. She had come to Mason because her supervisor was unreachable and payroll refused in advance without executive approval. Walter had been present that day. So had Richard Vale and another senior manager. Avery remembered gripping the back of a chair because her knees would not stop shaking. "My mother needs surgery," she had said. "I need 1 day, maybe 2. I can make up the hours. I am asking for an advance, not a gift." Mason had looked at the documents she placed before him. Then he had looked at the men in the room. His face had gone cold. "Personal tragedy does not stop business, Ms. Collins." The words had landed without volume. That made them worse. Avery had stared at him, waiting for something human to follow. Nothing did. She had walked out before anyone saw her cry. Now, standing in the same office, she felt that old humiliation rise inside her. "My mother could have died." Walter's expression tightened. Mason did not move. Avery continued. "The last time you decided your business mattered more than my life, I spent 12 hours in a hospital wondering if I would lose the only family I had." Mason's jaw shifted. "But she survived. You do not get credit for that." A silence opened between them. For once, Mason did not answer quickly. "No," he said. "I do not." The words confused her. She had expected indifference, perhaps arrogance, not that quiet note of something she could not name. She gathered the papers from his desk. "I am not getting on your plane." Mason placed one hand over the folder. "You are." Avery looked at his hand, then at him. "Take it off." Walter rose. "Mason." Mason removed his hand. His eyes never left Avery's. "This meeting concerns the future of Kane Atlantic's southern routes. If someone inside this company is diverting money through aviation accounts, I need to know how and why before I sit across from the people involved. Then tell me the truth. I have told you what you need. That is not the same thing. It is all I can give you." Avery pulled the folder against her chest. "Then find someone else." She walked toward the door. Mason's voice stopped her. "If you refuse the assignment, I will accept your resignation." Walter turned sharply. Avery looked back. Mason's face revealed nothing. He had placed her job on one side of the scale and his will on the other. He already believed he knew which would weigh more. Avery thought of rent, medical bills, her mother's prescriptions, the heating system that needed replacement before winter. She hated him for knowing exactly where to press. 4 o'clock, she said. Mason nodded. Avery opened the door. "Do not mistake necessity for obedience." His answer came softly. "I never do." She left before she could throw the folder at him. That evening, South Boston smelled of rain and bread from the bakery below Avery's apartment. Diane Collins stood in the kitchen stirring soup with one hand while an old radio played near the window. She was 61 with gentle eyes and a scar near her collarbone that disappeared beneath her sweater. Avery placed her bag on a chair. "You are supposed to sit while that cooks. I have spent a year sitting. You had heart surgery. A year ago. You still use that excuse when you do not want to carry groceries. It is an excellent excuse." Avery kissed her cheek. Diane studied her face. What happened, Mason Kane? That man has an impressive ability to ruin a room without entering it. He entered this one years ago. Diane turned down the burner. Avery told her about Miami, the suspicious payments, and the forced trip. Diane listened without interrupting. When Avery finished, her mother poured soup into 2 bowls. You still hate him. He earned it. Diane touched the edge of her scar. The hospital called last week. Avery looked up. Why, they are closing an old assistance account. They wanted to confirm that the remaining balance was paid. We know it was paid. They still would not tell me by whom. Avery picked up her spoon. It was probably a charity fund. They said the donor requested privacy. That is what charities say. Diane watched her. Hate can make a person as blind as love. Avery tasted the soup. Then I am safe. Are you? I am not in danger of loving Mason Kane. Diane smiled faintly. That was not what I asked. The private airfield outside Boston was quiet at 3:30 the next afternoon. The sun hung low behind a line of bare trees. Wind moved across the runway, carrying the smell of fuel and cold pavement. Mason's jet stood near a hangar white and narrow with the Kane Atlantic emblem beside the tail. Avery arrived carrying 1 suitcase and the folder of financial records. Caleb Ward met her beside the gate. He was one of Mason's security men, broad, calm, and unexpectedly polite. Ms. Collins. Caleb. Mr. Kane is inside. Of course he is. Caleb took her suitcase. She kept the folder. As they approached the aircraft, raised voices came from beneath the left wing. Evan Brooks Mason's pilot stood facing a maintenance technician in a dark blue jacket. I did not authorize another inspection, Evan said. The technician lowered his voice. Operations did. I am operations when it concerns this aircraft. Avery slowed. There was a small logo stitched above the technician's pocket. A silver bird inside a circle. Caldera Aviation Services. The same symbol appeared on the invoices. Avery took out her phone and photographed him. The technician saw her. For 1 second, neither moved. Then he stepped away from Evan and headed toward the hangar. Avery followed. Excuse me. He walked faster. Sir. He disappeared behind a service vehicle. Mason's voice came from behind her. What are you doing? Avery turned and held up the phone. Paying attention. She showed him the image. The moment Mason saw the logo, every trace of casual calm vanished. Caleb. His security man approached. Find him. Do not let him leave the property. Caleb signaled to Noah Price, the second guard. Both men moved toward the hangar. Evan joined them. That contractor was not here when I completed the pre-flight inspection. Mason looked toward the jet. Check the aircraft again. I already started. Walter's sedan arrived near the gate. He stepped out before the car fully stopped. We should delay the flight. Mason glanced at his watch. No. Walter came closer. We have an unidentified technician connected to suspicious payments. And if we cancel now, Holloway knows we found the account. Avery looked between them. Grant Holloway. Neither man answered. She knew the name. Everyone connected to East Coast shipping knew it. Holloway controlled warehouses, unions, and freight routes from Baltimore to northern Florida. 3 companies had challenged him in the past 5 years. 1 went bankrupt. 1 burned. The owner of the 3rd vanished while sailing off the coast of Virginia. Avery lowered her voice. The shell company is connected to Holloway. Mason looked at her. We do not know that yet. You know enough to say his name. Walter faced Mason. The Miami meeting can be rescheduled. No. The port board votes in 48 hours. If Holloway gains control of the terminal, he controls the southern route. Avery stared at the jet. You are willing to risk everyone on that plane because you are afraid of looking weak. Mason stepped closer. His voice was meant only for her. I am willing to take a calculated risk to prevent a war. Men like you always call it calculated when someone else might die. Something flashed in his eyes. Not anger. Something darker, more personal. Before he could answer, Evan returned. The aircraft is clean. I checked the fuel lines controls and both engines. No sign of tampering. Did you find the technician? Mason asked. Caleb shook his head. His service vehicle is gone. Walter looked toward the road. He ran because he was recognized, or because he was told to, Mason said. Avery tightened her grip on the folder. Cancel the flight. Mason looked at the aircraft, then at the lowering sun. He made the decision without asking anyone. We leave. The cabin smelled of leather coffee and expensive wood polish. Avery took a seat across from Mason at a narrow table. Caleb and Noah sat farther back. Evan closed the cockpit door after announcing that the flight to Miami would take just over 3 hours. As Boston disappeared beneath a layer of clouds, Avery opened her laptop. Mason poured 2 glasses of water. She ignored the one he placed beside her. You should drink. You should stop giving orders. It was advice. It needs practice. He sat across from her. The sky outside the window shifted from gold to violet. Avery reviewed the transactions again, following account numbers through port fees, consulting contracts, and maintenance budgets. Mason read in silence, one hand resting near his phone. 30 minutes passed. Then Avery saw it. A transfer from a Baltimore shipping broker had entered the Miami development account 2 days before the first payment to Caldera Aviation. The broker was owned through 3 holding companies. The final company shared an attorney with Grant Holloway. Avery turned the laptop toward Mason. This money came from Holloway's network. Mason studied the screen. You are certain I am certain the same lawyer formed both companies. I am certain the funds moved through Miami and reached the aviation contractor. I am also certain someone inside Kane Atlantic approved every step. Mason looked toward the cockpit. Richard. Maybe. He attended the meeting when you asked for help with your mother. Avery froze. It was not the answer itself. It was the fact that he remembered. You remember who was in the room. Mason's eyes returned to her. I remember everything that matters. Her pulse changed. She hated that it did. What did Richard have to do with my mother? Mason closed the laptop. Fasten your seatbelt. Avery stared at him. That is not an answer. The cabin lights flickered. A faint metallic vibration moved through the floor. Caleb looked up from the rear seat. Mason stood. Avery's anger sharpened. Sit down. He looked toward the cockpit. I heard something. So did I. The vibration came again. This time it was louder. Evan's voice sounded through the intercom. Mr. Kane, everyone needs to secure immediately. Noah rose. What is it? The aircraft shifted left. A glass slid across the table and shattered against the wall. Avery grabbed the edge of her seat. Mason looked at her belt. Secure it. Tell me why Holloway paid the company that serviced this plane. Avery. Tell me. The left engine exploded. Light and fire flashed beyond the window. The entire cabin dropped. Avery struck the wall as the plane rolled violently. Papers filled the air. A ceiling panel tore loose. Oxygen masks fell above the seats. Caleb shouted from the rear. Noah tried to reach the cockpit, but the floor tilted beneath him. Smoke poured through the cabin. Avery reached for her belt. The strap had twisted beneath her hip. She pulled harder. It would not move. Mason released his own buckle. What are you doing? She screamed. He crossed the falling cabin as luggage and broken glass crashed around him. The plane tilted toward the ocean. Avery saw gray water rising through the window. Mason reached her, forced the twisted strap free, and locked it across her body. She grabbed his coat. Sit down. There was no time. He braced one hand against the wall and placed his body over hers. What are you doing? Making sure you survive. And you. His eyes held hers, while alarms screamed through the cabin. I will improvise. The ocean struck them with the force of a collapsing building. For one impossible second, Avery felt nothing, no pain, no sound, no air. Then the cabin broke apart around her. Cold water exploded through the windows. Metal screamed. The table tore loose from the floor and vanished into a wall of white foam. Mason's body slammed against hers, shielding her as the aircraft spun through darkness. Avery tried to breathe. Water filled her mouth. The belt cut across her ribs. Her fingers clawed at the buckle, but the cabin had turned sideways and she could no longer tell which direction led to the surface. A hand closed around hers. Mason. She could not see him. She only felt his grip tighten once, hard enough to hurt. Then the seat ripped free. Avery was thrown forward. The world became black water, broken glass, and fire shining above her like a distant sun. She kicked toward the light. Something caught her ankle. Panic took over. She twisted, pulled, and struck at the darkness until her shoe came free. Her lungs burned. Her vision narrowed. Then her head broke through the surface. Avery dragged in one breath before a wave crashed over her face. She coughed and turned in the water. Parts of the aircraft floated around her. One wing burned near the shore, orange flames bending beneath the wind. Smoke rolled across the beach. A section of the cabin had split open against the sand. Mason. Her voice came out thin. Another wave lifted her and pushed her toward the shallows. Avery tried again. Mason. No answer. She crawled through the surf on her hands and knees. Blood dripped from somewhere above her left eye. Her chest felt crushed. Every breath arrived sharp and incomplete. She reached wet sand and collapsed. For a few seconds she could not move. The beach tilted beneath her. The sky spun. Fire cracked behind her while pieces of the jet burned along the shoreline. She pressed her palm against the sand and forced herself up. Caleb. Nothing. Noah. Only the wind. Then she heard a sound beneath the flames. Her name. Avery. She froze. The voice came again, rough and strained. Avery. She turned toward the broken center of the aircraft. Mason was trapped beneath a twisted section of cabin wall near the edge of the wreckage. One leg disappeared under a bent metal support. His left arm lay at an unnatural angle. Blood soaked the side of his shirt. A thin stream of fuel moved across the sand toward the fire. Avery stumbled toward him. Mason saw the fuel before she did. Stop. She kept moving. Do not come closer. The words were weak, but the command remained. Avery dropped beside the metal support and tried to lift it. It did not move. Go, Mason said. She looked at him. What? The fuel. A gust of wind pushed the flames closer. Mason tried to shift his trapped leg and nearly blacked out from the pain. You cannot lift this. Be quiet. Avery. She looked toward the tree line. It was close enough. She could run. She could reach the palms before the fire touched the fuel. She could save herself. For one brief and terrible moment, she saw the choice clearly. Mason Kane had made her feel smaller than grief. He had watched her beg for help and answered with ice. He had forced her onto this plane. His enemies had turned the sky into fire. If she left him, no one would call it murder. No one would blame her. He read the thought on her face. His expression changed. Not with anger, with acceptance. I will not blame you. Avery stared at him. That would require you to be alive. She searched the sand and found part of a seat frame half buried near the wreckage. She dragged it toward the metal support. The fuel had reached the burning edge of the wing. Blue fire raced across the surface. Mason's voice sharpened. Run! Avery jammed the seat frame beneath the support. On 3, you need to leave. 1, Avery. 2. The fire moved closer. She pushed down with everything she had. The metal groaned but did not lift. Mason pressed his good hand against the ground and tried to pull his leg free. Avery screamed with effort. 3. The support rose half an inch. Mason twisted. His leg came loose. The seat frame snapped. The metal crashed back into the sand. Avery grabbed Mason beneath his good arm and dragged him away from the wreckage. He tried to stand, but his injured leg folded. They fell together. The fuel ignited behind them. Mason pushed Avery down and covered her body with his own. The center of the aircraft exploded. Heat rolled across them. Sand and metal struck the ground on every side. Avery buried her face against Mason's chest while the air filled with burning debris. When the sound faded, neither moved. Avery could hear Mason breathing above her. Fast, uneven, alive. She turned her head. His face was inches from hers. Blood ran from a cut near his mouth. His eyes were closed. Mason. He opened them. You stayed. You sound disappointed. A weak breath left him. It might have been a laugh. Then his weight collapsed against her. Avery pushed at his shoulder. Mason. He did not answer. Fear moved through her so quickly that it felt like anger. She slapped his cheek. Mason Kane, wake up. His eyes opened again. That was unnecessary. You were unconscious. I was resting. You were lying on me. That part was intentional. Avery stared at him. His face remained serious. Then she realized he was trying to distract her from the fact that he could barely breathe. She shifted carefully and helped him roll onto his back. The beach around them looked like the aftermath of a war. Smoke covered the sky. The nose of the jet had broken away from the cabin and rested farther down the shore. One engine burned in the surf. Pieces of luggage, torn seats, and shattered panels moved with the tide. Avery looked toward the cockpit. We need to find the others. Mason did not answer. She turned. He was staring at the wreckage with an expression she could not read. Then he forced himself to sit. Pain drained the color from his face. Avery reached for him. I can do it. You cannot even move your left arm. I can move it. He tried. His breath caught. Avery placed his good arm over her shoulders. Lean on me. I am heavier than you. I noticed. Together they crossed the beach. Every step cost Mason something. His injured leg dragged slightly. Blood darkened the side of his shirt. Avery's own calf burned where a piece of metal had cut through her pants, but she refused to look down. They reached the nose section. The cockpit windows were shattered. Evan Brooks remained strapped into the pilot's seat. His hands were still wrapped around the controls. Avery stopped. She had spoken to him less than an hour earlier. He had checked the aircraft. He had argued with the technician. He had promised clear weather over the coast. Now he sat motionless while smoke drifted through the broken cockpit. Mason stepped past Avery. He pressed 2 fingers against Evan's neck. The answer was already visible, but he waited. Then he lowered his hand. He kept the nose up. Avery looked at the deep trench the aircraft had carved through the sand. He got us to shore. He got us close enough. Mason unfastened Evan's belt and eased his body back against the seat. For one moment, his hand rested on the pilot's shoulder. Thank you, he said quietly. Avery looked away. They found Noah near the rear cabin. He had died on impact. Caleb was farther inland beneath a section of torn flooring. Mason knelt beside him despite the pain in his ribs. He removed Caleb's watch. Avery saw his fingers tremble. Was he family? She asked. Mason closed Caleb's eyes. He had a daughter. The answer was not what she expected. How old? 7. Avery swallowed. Mason stared at the watch in his hand. He promised her he would be home by Friday. The cold in his voice was gone. What remained was worse. Guilt. Avery looked at the covered distance between the bodies and the water. We should move them. Mason's expression hardened again. We do not have tools. We have emergency blankets. He looked at her. We need those. We have 2. If the temperature drops tonight, we may need both. Avery glanced toward Caleb. We are not leaving them exposed. Mason was silent for several seconds. Then he nodded. They found blankets inside a damaged storage compartment. One was silver. The other was bright orange. They covered Evan first, then Noah and Caleb. Stones held the corners in place. Mason said each name aloud. Evan Brooks. The wind moved the silver blanket. Noah Price. A wave broke behind them. Caleb Ward. Mason placed Caleb's watch inside his coat pocket. Avery stood beside him without speaking. She had expected a man like Mason to treat death as a cost of doing business. Instead, he looked as if each body had carved something out of him. The fire continued to spread through the wreckage. They needed to move. Mason turned toward the remaining cabin. We search before the tide comes in. For what water? Medical supplies. Anything that sends a signal. Avery looked at his shoulder. You need treatment. So do you. We are not going back near the fire. We are if we want to survive the night. There it was again, the voice that expected obedience. Avery stepped in front of him. You are injured. I am injured. 3 people are dead. Your plane was sabotaged and we have no idea where we are. You do not get to act like this is another room you control. Mason held her gaze. The wind moved smoke between them. What do you suggest? The question surprised her. It sounded almost sincere. Avery pointed toward the edge of the trees. We move what we can away from the tide. We treat the bleeding. Then we search together. Mason looked toward the water, judging the distance. Agreed. Avery blinked. That easily? You were right. She stared at him. You should sit down. You may have brain damage. His mouth moved again. This time she was certain it was almost a smile. They dragged supplies to a patch of ground above the tide line. The first aid kit survived inside a metal compartment. So did 6 bottles of water, several protein bars, a survival knife, a flare gun, 3 cartridges, a lighter, a small mirror, a coil of nylon rope, and part of a nautical emergency map. The satellite phone had broken in half. Mason tried it anyway. The screen remained dark. Avery found a bottle of whiskey beneath a crushed service cart. Mason looked at it. For the wounds. Of course. I do not drink when I am working. You own half the harbor. I am always working. That explains your personality. They continued searching. Near the tail section, Avery found a metal case marked with emergency instructions. Inside was the housing for the aircraft locator beacon. The cover had been opened. Several wires hung loose. She carried it to Mason. Is this supposed to look like that? He took it with his good hand. His expression changed. The ends of the wires were clean, not torn, not burned. Cut. Mason turned the device over. The impact did not do this. Avery felt the wind against the blood on her face. The technician. Possibly. Someone paid him. Someone knew the route. Someone knew the aircraft. She looked toward the bodies beneath the blankets. This plane was meant to vanish. Mason stared at the dead beacon. Yes. Avery wrapped her arms around herself. For the first time since the crash, the cold reached her. She looked toward the open water. Will anyone know where to search? The flight plan was filed, so they know the route. If the route was not altered. Avery looked at him. Was it? Mason? Said nothing. That silence told her enough. You changed the route. Evan diverted south after takeoff. Why? We received a weather warning. There was no bad weather. The warning was false. Avery closed her eyes. The aircraft had not simply fallen from the sky. Someone had moved it away from the expected path, disabled the beacon, and planted a man close enough to touch the plane before takeoff. You knew we might be in danger. I knew there was a possibility, and you still put us on that plane. I believed the aircraft was secure. 3 people are dead because you believed wrong." Mason's face went still. The words struck. Avery saw it. She almost apologized. Then she looked toward Caleb's covered body and decided not to. Mason set the beacon down. "You are bleeding through your pants." She looked at her leg. A long cut ran from below her knee toward her calf. Blood had soaked the fabric. "It is fine. It is not. You are not touching my leg until I see what happened to your side." He looked at her as if no one had spoken to him that way in years. "You first." "No. Avery. Mason." The use of his first name stopped him. Neither had noticed that she had said it. The air shifted between them. Then he sat on a piece of broken paneling. "You first," he repeated, but the command had softened. Avery lowered herself onto the sand. Mason opened the first aid kit and cut the torn fabric away from her wound. His left arm remained close to his body. He worked with one hand, slower than usual, but precise. "This will hurt. Everything involving you does." He looked up. Then he poured antiseptic over the cut. Pain tore through her leg. Avery grabbed his wrist. Her nails dug into his skin. She bit down on a cry. Mason waited until her breathing steadied. "You can insult me if it helps. I am trying to choose only one. That must be difficult. More difficult than surviving the crash." He wrapped the wound with gauze. His fingers were careful. Too careful for the man she had imagined him to be. When he finished, Avery took the kit from him. "Your turn. It can wait. It cannot." She pulled the torn side of his shirt away from the wound. A metal edge had cut through the fabric below his ribs. The wound was deep, but not wide. Bruising spread across his side. Avery poured whiskey over a cloth. Mason watched her. "Do not enjoy this." "I am trying not to." She pressed the cloth against his skin. His body tightened. No sound escaped him. Avery looked at his face. "Does anything hurt you?" "Yes." "You hide it well." "I was taught to." "By your father." Mason's eyes changed. A wall came down inside them and rose again before she could see what stood behind it. "Finish the bandage." Avery wrapped his side. When she touched his shoulder, he pulled away. "That needs attention too. It is bruised. You cannot move it. I can move enough. That is not the same thing. It is tonight." She wanted to argue. Then she saw how pale he had become. Avery secured his arm against his chest with a strip of cloth from a torn seat cover. Mason did not thank her. She did not expect him to. The sun had begun to lower. They counted the supplies. 6 bottles of water, 8 protein bars, a handful of sealed crackers, 1 flare gun, 3 cartridges, 2 emergency blankets, though one now covered the dead, a knife, a lighter that sparked only after several attempts, a mirror, a rope, a broken phone, a partial map. Mason studied the horizon. 2 days if we waste anything, 4 if we ration. And rescue. They will search the expected flight path first. We are not on it. No. How far off, I do not know. Avery looked at the dark line of trees. Do you know where we are? Somewhere along the Carolina coast. Possibly an uninhabited island. Possibly the map is incomplete. That seems to be a pattern today. Mason ignored the remark. We need shelter above the tide line. At sunrise we find fresh water. You think there is fresh water? There are trees. There may be a spring or collected rainwater. And if there is not, we solve that when we know. Avery looked at him. You always sound certain. Certainty keeps people calm. It also makes them follow bad decisions. Mason met her eyes. Then do not follow me blindly. She almost laughed. I have never done anything involving you blindly. They used pieces of cabin wall and branches to build a rough shelter near the trees. Mason tried to lift one of the larger panels, but his shoulder failed. Avery caught the edge before it fell on his leg. You are done lifting. I am functional. You are bleeding and lying. Both can be true. She took the panel from him. You carry the lighter. Mason looked at the small object in his hand. An important responsibility. Do not lose it. Yes, ma'am. Avery stared at him. The words were dry, but there was no cruelty in them. She turned away before he saw the smile she could not explain. By the time darkness covered the beach, they had a low shelter, a small fire, and enough distance from the wreckage to breathe without choking on smoke. The temperature dropped quickly. Avery sat near the flames with her knees drawn close. Mason removed his coat and handed it to her. No. You are shaking. So are you. I am not. His teeth nearly struck together on the final word. Avery took the coat and opened it across both of them. Mason looked down at the fabric between their shoulders. This is inefficient. It is your favorite word. It is an accurate word. Move closer. His gaze shifted to her face. Avery immediately regretted the instruction. Body heat, she said. That is all. Of course. Mason moved until their shoulders touched beneath the coat. The contact was small. It felt enormous. For several minutes, they listened to the fire. The aircraft burned lower behind them. Avery looked toward the covered bodies. Will Caleb's daughter know what happened? Yes. How, I will tell her. Avery turned. He worked for me. That is not what I asked. Mason stared into the flames. I made a promise to his wife when he joined my security team. If anything happened, she would hear it from me. Avery studied his profile. His face remained controlled, but his good hand had closed into a fist. You blame yourself. I put him on the plane. You did not plant the device. I created the conditions that made someone want to. The answer unsettled her. It was the closest he had come to admitting guilt. Avery pulled the coat tighter around them. Why did you cross the cabin? Mason did not look at her. You worked for me. That is not an answer. It is the one I have. You could have died. So could you. That mattered to you. His eyes moved to hers. The fire reflected in them. For 1 second, the coldness disappeared. She saw fear there. Not fear for himself. Then he looked away. Sleep, Avery. She lay down beneath the emergency blanket while Mason remained seated near the fire. You need rest too. I will take the first watch. Watch for what smoke. Tide. Anything that moves. There are no people here. People are not the only danger. Avery closed her eyes. The last thing she heard was Mason adding wood to the fire. When she woke, the sky was still dark. The space beside the flames was empty. Mason's coat remained over her. His shoes were gone. A trail of blood marked the sand near the tree line. Avery stood, too quickly. Pain shot through her leg. Mason. No answer. She took the survival knife and followed the blood into the trees. The air beneath the canopy was warmer and wet. Leaves brushed her arms. Insects moved in the darkness. The blood trail continued across exposed roots. Mason. Her voice returned to her in pieces. She reached a broken branch. Fresh blood marked the leaves. Then something moved behind her. Avery turned and raised the knife. A shadow stepped through the trees. Avery raised the knife with both hands. Do not come closer. The figure stopped. Moonlight slipped between the leaves and caught the edge of a familiar face. Mason stood 10 feet away, barefoot, pale, and carrying 2 plastic containers filled with water. Avery lowered the knife. Relief struck first. Anger followed hard enough to steady her knees. What are you doing? Finding water. You disappeared. You were asleep. That does not make it better. Mason looked at the blade still pointed toward his chest. Were you planning to rescue me or kill me? I had not decided. He took another step. His shirt was open at the side. Fresh blood had soaked through the bandage Avery wrapped around him. She noticed the way he favored his right leg. You reopened the wound. I found a spring. You could have told me before walking into a forest in the dark. You needed sleep, and you needed not to bleed to death. Mason lifted one container slightly. We have water. Avery took it from him, set it on the ground, and grabbed his wrist. His skin was cold. Sit down. I can walk. That was not a question. His eyebrow lifted. You objected to orders. I object to yours. She guided him toward a fallen tree. Mason sat with visible reluctance. Avery opened one container, soaked the edge of her shirt, and pressed it against the blood at his side. He looked at the water. That is drinking water. You are leaking. It was difficult to collect. So was dragging you away from an explosion. Mason watched her clean the wound. His breathing stayed controlled, but the muscles in his stomach tightened beneath her hand. You should have stayed near the fire, he said. You should have stayed where I could see you. His gaze settled on her face. There was a pause that lasted too long. Avery looked down at the bandage. This is not a transaction. Everything is. Maybe that is why no one stays. The words slipped out before she could stop them. Mason became still. The forest seemed to listen with him. Avery waited for anger. It did not come. He looked past her toward the darkness. We should return before the fire dies. He stood. The conversation closed as neatly as a locked door. Avery picked up the second container. She followed him through the trees, watching the blood trail beneath his feet. By the time they reached the beach, the first gray light of dawn had begun to spread across the horizon. The fire had fallen to a bed of red coals. Avery added dry branches while Mason lowered himself beside the shelter. He looked exhausted. The sight unsettled her more than she wanted to admit. In Boston, Mason Kane never appeared tired. He arrived before everyone else and left after the building emptied. He stood through meetings that lasted hours. He spoke with the same calm voice whether discussing a shipping contract or a man who had betrayed him. Here, without polished shoes and locked doors, his body refused to obey the legend built around him. Avery handed him one of the water containers. He did not drink. Half a cup each, he said. You found the spring. That does not change the ration. We have more water now. We have 2 containers. We do not know how quickly the spring refills. Avery looked toward the trees. How far? Less than half a mile. You walked half a mile on that leg? I walked back. That was not what I asked. Mason took a small drink. Avery did the same. The water tasted of leaves and earth. It was the best thing she had ever tasted. They waited for the sun to rise before returning inland. Avery marked the path by tying strips of torn fabric around branches. Mason said nothing, but she noticed him checking each marker as they moved. The spring was little more than a shallow pool beneath a wall of dark stone. Clear water gathered between roots before running into the soil. Avery crouched beside it. This may be rainwater. It may be enough. She studied the slope, the trees, and the direction of the light. The partial emergency map was folded inside Mason's coat. Avery spread it across a dry rock. The page showed a section of coastline, several shipping lanes, and a chain of narrow islands. If the current pushed us southwest after impact, we could be somewhere east of Cape Lookout. Mason knelt beside her. Why southwest? The broken wing landed north of the main cabin. The wind was moving toward the beach. The tide last night pulled debris in the opposite direction. You noticed that during the crash. I noticed it after I woke up. Mason looked at the map again. There are dozens of islands. Most are closer to shipping routes than where the search teams will begin. That still leaves a large area. Avery picked up a piece of charcoal and marked the likely section. If we build a signal high enough, vessels moving south may see the smoke. Mason glanced toward the trees. The beach is visible from the water. Not if the wind keeps pushing smoke inland. He looked at her. You are certain, no. You sound certain. Avery folded the map. Certainty keeps people calm. For the first time, Mason smiled. It was brief, tired, and real. Avery felt it in her chest. She looked away. They carried water back to the beach and spent the morning moving the shelter farther above the tide line. Mason cut branches with the survival knife. Avery secured them with rope and strips of fabric. They stretched the emergency blanket across the frame and used part of the cabin wall as a wind barrier. Mason tried to lift the metal panel alone. His injured shoulder failed halfway. The panel slipped. Avery caught one end before it crushed his foot. You are going to stop doing that. Doing what pretending pain is a rumor. He took the lighter from the sand. What would you prefer, honesty? That sounds expensive. You can afford it. Mason studied the small lighter in his palm. Avery handed him a bundle of dry leaves. You are in charge of the fire. He looked toward the shelter. You are managing me. You are welcome. Avery expected resistance. Instead, he crouched near the coals and began feeding the flame. They worked until the sun stood high. When the shelter was finished, Avery stepped back and examined it. One side leaned lower than the other. The metal panel was scratched and blackened. The emergency blanket snapped in the wind. It was ugly. It was also stronger than what they had built the night before. Mason stood beside her. It may survive one night. That sounded almost like praise. It was an assessment. You are bad at praise. I have never needed it. Everyone needs it. No. Everyone wants it. Avery looked at him. What did your father praise? Mason's face closed. She had seen the reaction before. The question had found something. He moved toward the supplies. We should search the northern beach. Avery did not follow. What did he praise Mason? He stopped with his back to her. For several seconds, the only sound was the tide. Obedience. Avery waited. Mason turned. His expression remained calm, but the calm looked thinner now. My father believed pain was useful. He said it taught a person what they could survive. Avery glanced at the pale scars across his hands. Did he give you many lessons? Yes. The answer held no self-pity. That made it worse. What did they teach you? Mason looked toward the ocean. That survival and living are not the same thing. He picked up the knife and walked toward the wreckage. Avery followed without asking another question. They searched the northern edge of the island. The beach narrowed between the water and a rise of dense trees. Pieces of the aircraft had washed into the rocks. Avery found a sealed package of crackers, a flashlight with weak batteries, and one additional bottle of water. Mason found part of the luggage compartment. Inside were clothes, a wool blanket, and a leather suitcase, split down the middle. Avery held up a black evening dress. Useful. You could wear it for dinner. With what shoes? Mason glanced at her bare foot. I will arrange something. She laughed before she could stop herself. The sound surprised them both. It was the first laughter on the island that did not come from shock. Avery folded the dress and added it to the pile. Mason watched her. What? Nothing. You are staring. I was listening. To what? You laughing. Her smile faded. The air between them shifted. Mason looked away first. They carried the recovered supplies back to camp. Avery used part of the wool blanket to pad Mason's shoulder. He objected only once. She called that progress. By afternoon, the cut on her leg had begun to swell. Mason noticed when she tried to hide a limp. Sit. I am fine. No. She kept walking. He stepped into her path. You cannot order me. Then consider it a request. The word sounded unnatural in his mouth. Avery looked up at him. You are requesting that I sit, yes. Why? Because your leg is infected. It is irritated. It is red. You are not a doctor. I know what infection looks like." Something in his tone changed. Avery sat on the edge of the blanket. Mason knelt before her and unwrapped the bandage. The skin around the cut was warm and swollen. He cleaned it with boiled water and the remaining antiseptic. His hands were slow and precise. Avery watched him. "You have done this before." "Yes, for your men, for myself." She looked at the scars along his ribs where his torn shirt exposed them. Some were thin, others were wide and uneven. These did not come from shipping contracts. Some contracts are less civilized than others. "Did your father give you those too?" Mason stopped. Avery immediately regretted the question. "You do not have to answer." He resumed cleaning the wound. "He gave me some." The words were quiet. "What about the others? Men who believed his death made me weak." "How old were you?" 24. "And you took control of everything." "There was no one else." Walter advised. "I decided." Avery studied his face. "What happened to the men who thought you were weak?" Mason tied the clean bandage. They changed their minds. The answer carried no detail. It did not need any. Avery should have been afraid. Instead, she found herself thinking about a 24-year-old man inheriting a criminal empire built by a father who taught through pain. She pulled her leg away. "Understanding you does not make me like you." Mason looked up. "I did not ask you to." "Good. I would not trust your answer." She stared at him. Then she saw the faint edge of humor in his eyes. The monster beneath the suit had learned how to tease her. That might have been more dangerous than the gunman. The sun lowered. Avery divided the protein bars into smaller portions. Mason watched her count. "You measure everything. Numbers behave when you question them. They can be manipulated. Only when men like you touch them." He leaned against the metal panel. "Men like me. Powerful men who think rules are for people with less money. You accepted a salary from one. I accepted a salary from a logistics company. You knew who owned it. I knew what people said. And what did you believe Avery looked at the darkening water? I believed staying close to dangerous men was safer than being noticed by them." Mason's expression sharpened. "Who noticed you?" "No one." "That is not an answer. It is the one I have." He recognized his own words. Avery saw it. She placed half a protein bar in his hand. Mason looked at the portion. "Take more." "No. You need it. So do you. I am larger. You have more blood." "I remember." He almost smiled again. Avery leaned back against the shelter. They ate in silence. Night came slowly. The wind softened, leaving the ocean strangely calm. Mason rebuilt the fire while Avery checked the knots on the shelter. When she finished, she found him staring at the flames. The firelight showed the bruising across his chest. His shirt had dried stiff with salt and blood. Avery sat beside him. "You said your father believed love made people weak." Mason did not move. "I did not say that. You did not have to." He added another branch to the fire. Avery waited. She had learned that silence was the only space where Mason sometimes chose honesty. "My mother tried to leave him," he said. Avery remained still. "I was 12. She rented a house in New Hampshire under another name. No one knew where she was." "But you did." "Yes, you visited her. One of my father's men followed me." Mason's voice stayed flat. That frightened Avery more than grief would have. A rival family paid him for the address. They attacked the house 2 nights later. Avery looked at his hands. He had closed them around each other so tightly that the knuckles were pale. "Were you there?" "No." "Did she survive?" Mason stared into the fire. "No, The word was almost lost beneath the waves. Avery felt something inside her soften. Not forgiveness. Something more dangerous. Compassion. You were a child. I knew the rules. You wanted to see your mother. I gave them her location. The man who followed you did that. He could not have followed me if I had stayed away. Avery turned toward him. What did your father say? That love leaves tracks. The sentence sat between them. Avery imagined a boy standing beside a coffin while a cruel man taught him that grief was evidence of weakness. What happened to the man who followed you? Mason's expression went still. My father found him. That is not what I asked. It is enough. Avery looked back at the fire. What happened to your mother was not your fault. In my family, fault matters less than consequence. And now you punish people before they can get close enough to matter. Mason's eyes moved to hers. You do not know what I do. I know exactly what you do. Avery's voice remained quiet. You make people feel unwanted. You hide the truth. You make every decision alone. Then you call the distance protection. Mason stood. The movement was too fast for his injuries. Pain crossed his face, but he buried it. You should sleep. Avery rose too. Running away from a conversation is still running. I am not running. You are limping, so technically you are right. His jaw tightened. Avery expected him to answer with cruelty. Instead, he looked tired. I do not know how to be what you want. I did not ask you to be anything. That is not true. The words came sharper than before. You want an explanation for the office, for your mother. For every moment I chose silence. You want those explanations to make sense to you. I want you to admit that you hurt me. Mason held her gaze. The fire cracked between them. His voice lowered. I know. The simple answer struck harder than an argument. Avery looked away. Neither spoke again. The next morning they returned to the wreckage. Avery wanted more material for the signal fire. Mason wanted anything that might reveal how the sabotage had been carried out. The tide had shifted during the night, exposing part of the lower cargo compartment. They climbed through a torn section of metal. Inside, the air smelled of fuel and salt. Avery searched beneath loose panels while Mason examined the damaged wiring. She found a scorched folder wedged behind a storage rack. Most of the pages had burned together. One remained partially readable. At the top was a purchase order number. Avery wiped soot away with her sleeve. She recognized the first 6 digits. That is from the Miami development account. Mason moved beside her. You are sure I reviewed the sequence yesterday? The surviving page listed replacement parts for the aircraft fuel control system. The supplier was Caldera Aviation Services. Below it was an internal approval code. Avery knew the code. Richard Vale. She looked at Mason. He approved access to the aircraft. Mason took the page. Richard approved the payment. And someone in your aviation division accepted the work order. Evan would not have. No, he was arguing with the technician. Mason looked toward the broken cockpit. The muscles in his jaw tightened. Avery continued examining the page. There is another code here. Mason leaned closer. The second approval belonged to an executive-level security account. Avery had seen it only once before, at the meeting where she asked for help with her mother. The code belonged to Richard's private authorization channel. He had access to employee records, she said. Yes. He knew about my mother. Mason said nothing. Avery turned toward him. He was in the room. Yes. You suspected he was selling information. I suspected someone was. When Mason looked at the paper in his hand, before you came to my office. The wreckage seemed to narrow around them. Avery heard the ocean beyond the broken wall. You knew there might be an informant in that room. Yes. That is why you spoke to me that way. Mason met her eyes. Avery stepped closer. You made it look like I meant nothing. I needed them to believe it. You let me believe it. I could not explain without exposing the investigation. You could have found another way. There was no safe way. Her anger rose so quickly that her hands began to shake. That is always your answer. It was the truth. No. It was your choice. Mason's voice hardened. I kept your mother from becoming leverage. And what did you think happened to me, Avery? I left that office believing I had begged the worst man in Boston for help and discovered he was even colder than people said. You were angry. Anger kept you distant. You do not get to decide which pain is acceptable for me. Mason said nothing. Avery pushed past him and climbed out of the wreckage. The sky had changed. Dark clouds gathered beyond the horizon. Wind moved through the trees in sudden, restless waves. Mason followed her. We need to secure the camp. Avery kept walking. Do not turn this into another order. A storm is coming. I can see that. Then help me. She stopped. The words were different. Not command. Request. Avery looked back at him. Mason stood beside the wreckage holding the scorched document. His injured arm remained against his chest. Blood had begun to stain the bandage at his side again. For the first time, he did not look like the man in control. He looked like someone asking her not to leave him alone with the consequences of everything he had done. Avery returned. They worked without speaking. The clouds advanced quickly. Mason strengthened the shelter while Avery moved supplies into sealed sections of luggage. They dug a shallow channel around the camp to guide rainwater away. Avery wrapped the flare gun and remaining cartridges in plastic. The first drops fell before they finished. Heavy, cold. The wind tore through the beach. Mason looked toward the trees. The shelter will not hold. The fuselage. He nodded. They gathered the supplies and ran toward the remaining tail section. Rain erased the beach beneath their feet. Avery's injured leg slowed her. Mason moved beside her, shielding her from flying sand with his body. A branch cracked above them. Avery looked up. Mason. He turned. The branch fell. He pushed Avery away. The wood struck his injured shoulder and drove him to one knee. Avery hit the ground. For a moment she could not see through the rain. Then she saw Mason beneath the branch. She crawled toward him. Mason, I am fine. You are under a tree. It is a branch. That distinction is not helping. Avery lifted one end. Mason pulled himself free, but his left arm hung uselessly. His face had gone gray. Water rushed around their ankles. The tide was moving higher. Avery placed his good arm over her shoulders. Lean on me. You cannot carry me. Then walk. They moved toward the fuselage. Wind screamed through the broken metal. Avery pushed Mason through the opening and climbed in after him. The inside was dark and sharp with the smell of wet fabric. Rain hammered the roof. Avery pulled the wool blanket around Mason and examined his shoulder. The swelling had doubled. His skin was hot despite the cold. You have a fever. No, you are burning. It is the air. The air is freezing. Mason tried to sit upright. His strength failed. He leaned back against the wall. Avery touched his forehead again. His eyes closed. Mason. He opened them slowly. The control was gone. There was no guarded expression, no quiet authority, no carefully measured distance. Only pain. Avery knelt beside him. We need to clean the wound. He caught her wrist. His grip was weaker than before. I paid for the surgery. The storm crashed against the aircraft. Avery stopped breathing. Mason's eyes struggled to focus on hers. Your mother, he whispered. I paid the hospital. Then his hand slipped from her wrist and his head fell against the metal wall. Avery caught him before he struck it. Mason. His body sagged against her. For one terrifying second, she thought he had stopped breathing. She pressed 2 fingers against his throat. A pulse beat beneath his skin. Fast. too fast. Avery pulled the wool blanket around him and forced herself to think. The storm had sealed them inside the broken tail section. Rain hammered the metal roof. Water pushed through cracks in the floor cold around her knees. Wind screamed through the torn opening as if the aircraft were still falling. Mason's shirt clung to his body. Avery peeled the wet fabric away from his side. The wound beneath his ribs had turned angry and red. The skin around it was swollen. A thin line of infection spread outward from the cut. His shoulder looked worse. The branch had struck close to the joint, and the bruising now reached across his chest. Avery searched through the supplies. Half a bottle of water, the first aid kit, a small amount of whiskey, 2 clean strips of fabric, 1 blanket, 1 flare. Not enough. Nothing was enough. She poured whiskey onto a cloth. Mason's eyes opened when she pressed it against the wound. His hand closed around her forearm. Careful. You are in no position to make requests. That was not a request. Good. I would have ignored it. His eyes drifted shut again. Avery cleaned the cut while he fought to remain conscious. You said you paid the hospital. His breathing changed. You heard that. I was sitting beside you. You should forget it. Avery looked at him. Even feverish, even barely able to sit upright, he was trying to bury the truth again. No. Avery, do not use my name like it ends the conversation. Mason opened his eyes. Rainwater ran from his hair across his face. She wrapped the clean fabric around his side and pulled it tight. He inhaled sharply. Tell me what happened. It does not matter now. It mattered enough for you to hide it for a year. The storm struck the fuselage with another violent gust. Metal groaned around them. Mason looked toward the opening. Avery caught his face between both hands and turned him back toward her. Look at me. His expression shifted. No one touched Mason Kane that way. No one ordered his attention. Yet he did not move away. The hospital told my mother that someone covered the remaining balance. They would not say who. Was it you? Yes. The answer came quietly. Avery released him. She sat back on her heels. For a moment she could only hear the rain. How the Kane Family Relief Foundation. You used a charity account. I used an account that could not be traced directly to me. Why? Mason looked at the dark water moving beneath the floor. Because Richard Vale was in the room when you asked for help. Avery waited. He continued. 3 weeks before that meeting, one of our drivers was attacked outside his daughter's school. Holloway's men knew his route, his schedule, and the name of the child. Avery felt cold spread through her that had nothing to do with the storm. You thought someone inside the company was selling information. I knew someone was. And you thought it was Richard. I suspected him. I did not have proof. So you humiliated me. I made it clear that you did not matter to me. The words hurt even now. Perhaps because she finally understood that they had been chosen carefully. Avery stared at him. You could have called me later. No. You could have sent a message. No. You could have explained after my mother was safe. Mason's voice sharpened despite the weakness in it. If Richard watched you leave my office, then watched money appear for the surgery, he would have followed the payment. If he learned I had helped you after publicly refusing, he would have known the refusal was false. So you let me believe it. Yes. Avery rose too quickly and struck her head against the curved wall. She barely felt it. You watched me work for you every day after that. Yes. You watched me avoid you. Yes. You knew why. Yes. Each answer was calm. Each one made her angrier. You let me hate you. Mason looked at her. Hate kept you away from me. Avery laughed once, but there was no humor in it. You keep saying that as if distance was a gift. It kept you alive. You do not know that. I know what Holloway does to people he believes matter. And you decided what I could survive. Mason tried to sit straighter. Pain forced him back against the wall. I made the safest choice available. No. You made the choice that gave you control. His gaze hardened. There was no perfect answer. I did not ask for perfect. Then what did you want? The truth. The truth would have placed you in danger. I was already in danger. I worked inside your company. I reviewed your accounts. I sat across from you in rooms filled with men who carried guns. You were invisible to them, because you made me feel invisible to everyone. The words hung between them. Mason's expression changed. The fever had stripped away his defenses. Avery saw the impact before he could conceal it. She lowered her voice. I stood in your office thinking my mother might die. I had not slept. I had no money. I had nowhere else to go. I asked you for help, and you looked at me like my fear was an inconvenience. I know. No, you know what you did. That is not the same as knowing what it did to me. Mason closed his eyes. Avery thought he might refuse to answer. Then he spoke. It taught you never to ask me for anything. Her anger faltered. Yes, it taught you that being seen by me was dangerous. Yes, it made you believe I had no heart. Avery looked at him. For a long time, that was easier to believe. The question was almost too quiet to hear. She looked toward the broken opening. Rain had begun to weaken, but the wind still pushed water across the floor. I do not know what I believe now. Mason's hand rested palm down beside him. His fingers trembled. Avery noticed and hated herself for noticing. She hated that concern had become instinct. You should drink. There is not enough. There is enough for you. No. Mason. He looked at her. Avery held the bottle near his mouth. This is a request. Something moved in his face. He took the water. Only a small amount. Then he pushed it back toward her. Your turn. I am not thirsty. You are lying. So are you. I am better at it. That is not something to be proud of. He looked away. Avery sat beside him and pulled the blanket around both of them. His skin was burning. She placed a damp cloth against his forehead. For several minutes, neither spoke. Then Mason said her name. Not as an order. Not as a warning. Just her name. What if I do not wake up? You will, if I do not. Avery pressed the cloth harder than necessary. Do not start. Walter will protect your mother. I do not care about Walter. You should. He is useful. You are not dying inside a broken plane after waiting a year to tell me the truth. I am not planning to. Good. But if I do... She turned toward him. His eyes were open now, clearer, more afraid. Not of death, of leaving something unfinished. The account records are stored in a private server beneath the harbor office, he said. The access code is Caleb's service number, followed by my mother's birthday. Avery stared at him. You are giving me access to your records. If Richard survived the investigation in Boston, you will need proof. We will need proof. Mason did not answer. Avery grabbed the front of his shirt. We. His gaze dropped to her hand, then rose to her face. We, he repeated. Say it like you believe it. The faintest trace of humor touched his eyes. You remain impossible, and you remain alive. For now. Avery tightened her grip. Do not say that again. Mason studied her face. Why? Because the thought of losing him had become unbearable. Because she had spent years protecting herself with anger, and somewhere between the fire, the spring, and the storm, anger had stopped being enough. She released his shirt. Because I need you conscious. That is not an answer. It is the one I have. He recognized the words. A weak smile appeared. This time Avery did not look away. The storm passed near dawn. The silence after it felt unnatural. Water dripped from the torn edges of the fuselage. Clouds moved east over a pale horizon. The sea remained rough, but the violent wind had fallen. Mason slept against Avery's shoulder. His fever had lowered slightly. She had not slept at all. She watched the light enter the broken aircraft and wondered how many versions of him existed. The man in Boston who could empty a room with one look. The boy who followed his mother to a hidden house. The employer who broke Avery with one sentence. The stranger who crossed a collapsing plane to fasten her belt. The injured man beside her who had finally admitted that he was afraid. Mason stirred. His eyes opened slowly. How long? Several hours. You stayed awake. You had a fever. You should have rested. You should learn gratitude. I am grateful. Avery looked at him. The words sounded strange from him. Say that again. No. Too late. I heard it. He tried to rise. His face tightened. Avery placed one hand against his chest. Slowly. We need to inspect the camp. The camp is gone. He looked toward the opening. Avery helped him stand. Outside, the beach had changed. The shelter had collapsed. The fire pit was filled with seawater. Branches and wreckage covered the sand. One of the water containers had disappeared. The signal area near the shore was buried beneath wet debris. Mason surveyed the damage. We rebuild. Avery followed his gaze toward the sky. No. He turned. There is no visible smoke. Search aircraft will not see us. That is why we move the signal. Where? The northern cliffs. Mason's expression hardened. The climb is too dangerous. It is the highest point on the island. Your leg is infected. Your shoulder is barely attached. Exactly. Avery crossed her arms. That sounded like an order. It was concern. Then say it like concern. His jaw tightened. She waited. Mason looked toward the cliffs beyond the trees. When he spoke again, the authority had left his voice. I am afraid you will get hurt. The honesty in the sentence caught her off guard. Avery nodded. Better. That does not mean I agree. You do not have to. We stay together. It was not a command this time. It was a condition. Avery held his gaze. Yes. They gathered what remained. The rope, the knife, the mirror, the flare gun. One cartridge, a damaged blanket, 2 protein bar portions, a small amount of water. Avery wrapped the scorched maintenance document inside plastic and placed it beneath her shirt. Mason carried the flare gun. Avery carried the rope and mirror. They entered the trees. The storm had turned the path into mud. Fallen branches blocked sections of the trail. Water ran between the roots. Avery moved first. Mason followed close behind, one hand occasionally touching her back when the ground shifted. She did not ask him to stop. By midday, they reached the base of the cliffs. Dark stone rose above the trees. The ocean struck the rocks below with enough force to send spray into the air. A narrow path curved along the side. Avery studied it. We can climb there. Mason shook his head. The stone is wet. It is the only route. We wait until it dries. The clouds are moving back. He looked at the horizon. Another line of gray had formed over the water. Avery tied the rope around her waist. I go first. No. You cannot climb with one arm and secure me at the same time. I can. You could not lift a wall panel this morning. That was different. It was metal. Mason took the rope from her and tested the knot. You climb. I hold from below. That is what I said. I am confirming it. You mean repeating it until it sounds like your idea? Yes. Despite everything, Avery smiled. She began climbing. The first section was easier than it appeared. Natural breaks in the stone created holds for her hands and feet. Mason moved below, keeping the rope tight. Left, he called. I see it. Your foot is too close to the edge. I see that too. Then move it. Stop talking. That would be unsafe. Avery reached the narrow middle ledge. She pulled herself onto it and looked down. Mason stood 20 feet below. His face was pale. Blood had begun to show through the bandage at his side. "You are bleeding. Keep moving. That is an order." "Yes." Avery turned back toward the rock. The next section was steeper. She found a hold above her and pulled. The stone broke. Her foot slipped. The world dropped away. Avery screamed as she fell over the edge. The rope snapped tight around her waist. Pain crushed the air from her lungs. She swung against the cliff. Below her, waves struck the rocks. "Avery!" Mason's voice cut through the wind. She looked up. He had wrapped the rope around his good arm and braced both feet against a stone. The injured shoulder shook under the strain. "Do not move," he said. "I was not planning to." He pulled. The rope moved an inch, then stopped. Avery tried to find a foothold. The rock beneath her shoe crumbled. Mason made a sound through clenched teeth. She saw blood spread beneath his bandage. Mason let go. "No. You will fall. No. You cannot hold me." His eyes locked on hers. "Watch me." He pulled again. Avery reached for the ledge. Her fingers brushed stone. Not enough. Mason shifted his grip. His injured arm buckled. The rope slipped. Avery dropped several inches. "Mason." He roared with pain and hauled the rope across his body. Avery caught the edge. Her nails scraped against wet stone. She kicked until one foot found a crack. Mason pulled. Avery climbed. When she reached the ledge, she rolled onto the rock and lay there gasping. Mason remained below one hand against the cliff. His head hung forward. Avery sat up. "You tore the wound. I am aware. You should have let me find another hold. You were falling. I could have pulled you down. You did not. That was luck." "No." He looked up. "That was a choice." Avery stared at him. The same man who had made every decision for her had nearly torn his body apart to preserve hers. She secured the rope to a stone and helped him climb. Mason reached the ledge slowly. His breath came in short bursts. When he stepped beside her, his injured leg slipped. The wet stone shifted beneath him. Mason fell backward. Avery caught the rope. His weight dragged her toward the edge. The skin burned from her palms. Mason struck the cliff below. He looked up at her. "Release it." "No." "Avery." "I said no. You cannot hold me." She wrapped the rope around her forearm. "Watch me." His eyes widened. The words were his. She planted both feet against the stone and pulled. Pain tore through her leg. The rope cut into her skin. Mason tried to climb with his good arm, but his strength failed. "Let go," he said. "I did not spend 6 days discovering there is a human being inside you just to watch him die." The words escaped before she could measure them. Mason stopped moving. Even above the crashing sea, she heard his voice. "You care. This is not the time to enjoy being right." Avery pulled again. Mason found a hold. He pushed upward. Together they gained 1 foot. Then another. Avery screamed with the final effort and dragged him over the edge. They collapsed beside each other. For several seconds, neither could breathe. Then Avery began to laugh. It came from shock exhaustion and the impossible fact that they were both still alive. Mason turned his head. A sound left him. At first she thought he was coughing. Then she realized he was laughing too, not the faint, almost smile he used when she challenged him. Real laughter. Deep and rough and entirely unguarded. Avery looked at him. "You almost died. So did you. This is not funny." No. Neither stopped laughing. When the laughter faded, Mason's hand remained beside hers on the stone. Their fingers touched. He did not move away. Neither did she. They completed the climb near sunset. The top of the cliff opened into a flat stretch of rock above the trees. From there, the ocean extended in every direction. Avery could see the curve of the island. No houses, no towers, no roads. Only water sand and broken green beneath a darkening sky. They built a signal fire with dry wood protected beneath the rocks. Avery added fabric from the aircraft and strips of damaged seat material to create thicker smoke. Mason set the mirror near the edge. They waited. The first hour passed, then another. The sun lowered. Avery's hope thinned with the light. Mason sat beside the fire, his injured arm held close to his body. "You should eat," he said. "So should you." He broke the remaining portion in half. They ate without speaking. A distant sound reached them. At first Avery thought it was thunder. Then Mason stood. Aircraft. She turned toward the southern horizon. A small plane moved above the water. Far away, but real. Avery grabbed the mirror. Mason took the flare gun. "Wait until it turns toward us. What if it does not? Then we make it." Avery angled the mirror toward the sun. Light flashed across the sky. Once, twice. The aircraft continued north. Again Mason said. Avery adjusted the mirror. The beam shook in her hand. Mason lifted the flare gun. "Now." He fired. The flare rose over the cliffs in a burst of red. For one bright second it seemed impossible that anyone could miss them. The aircraft continued. Avery ran toward the edge, waving both arms. "Here." Her voice vanished into the wind. "Look down." The plane passed beyond the northern point of the island. The flare fell into the sea. Avery stood motionless. The sound of the engine weakened, then disappeared. The silence that followed was worse than the crash. She lowered her arms. Mason came to stand beside her. "It may circle back." Avery looked toward the empty sky. "It will not. We do not know that. You do." Mason did not answer. Avery walked away from the fire and sat near the center of the rock. All the strength left her at once. She had survived the impact, the fire, the storm, the cliff. She had watched rescue pass close enough to see and far enough to lose. Mason lowered himself beside her. For once he had no strategy, no instruction, no certainty. "I am sorry," he said. Avery stared at the horizon. "For what?" "Bringing you onto the plane. You did not plant the device. I created the war that did. You also crossed the cabin. That does not erase the rest." "No." The answer surprised him. Avery leaned back against the warm stone. "We are not dead yet." Mason looked at her. "That sounds like something I would say. You are a terrible influence." The smallest smile appeared. Avery rested her head against his shoulder. He became still. Then his good arm moved around her, carefully, as if he expected her to refuse. She did not. They stayed that way until the last light disappeared. Avery woke before sunrise with an idea. She sat up so quickly that Mason opened his eyes. "What?" "The seat cushions. What about them?" The material burned black after the crash. Mason watched her. Avery continued. "Wet branches make thick smoke. The synthetic material makes it darker. We do not need a taller fire. We need a signal that lasts longer and can be seen against the water. The wreckage is on the southern beach. We can bring enough material here. You cannot make that climb twice. We do not need to." She looked toward the slope on the eastern side of the cliff. A less direct path wound between the trees. It was longer, but not as steep. "We descend there. Build the signal on the northern shore near the highest open ground. Shipping lanes pass east of the island." Mason studied the coastline. "How do you know the emergency map?" The current, the cargo route markings. You remembered them? I count everything. Mason looked at her for a long moment. Then he nodded. What do you need? The question mattered. Not what should we do. Not follow me. What do you need? Avery stood. The rope, the knife, anything reflective. And for you to stop pretending you can carry more than 5 pounds. I object to the final condition. Objection denied. They descended slowly. By midday, they reached the wreckage. Avery collected seat material, plastic panels, and damp branches. She built a wide base above the tide line. Mason arranged polished metal around the fire to reflect light toward the ocean. He tried to lift part of a seat. His knees nearly gave out. Avery caught him. Sit. I can help. You are helping. I am sitting. Exactly. Mason lowered himself onto a piece of metal. I thought we agreed on no orders. You have a fever. The Constitution has been suspended. He looked offended. Avery smiled and returned to the signal. She worked until her hands shook. She placed wet branches over the center and synthetic material beneath them. The lighter failed twice. On the third attempt, flame caught. White smoke rose first, then gray. Avery added the seat material. A column of black smoke climbed above the trees. Mason stood, despite her instruction. He looked east. Avery followed his gaze. A dark shape moved along the horizon. Not an aircraft, a vessel, far enough away to miss them, close enough to matter. Avery grabbed the mirror. Mason reached for the flare gun. The chamber was empty. They had used the final cartridge. Avery looked at the vessel. Keep the fire alive. She ran toward the water. Her legs screamed with every step. She climbed onto a section of wing near the surf and angled the mirror toward the sun. Light flashed across the ocean. The ship continued south. Avery adjusted the angle. Again, again, again. Behind her, Mason fed more material into the fire. Black smoke rolled upward. The vessel seemed to slow. Avery held her breath. A pale light blinked from its deck. Once, twice. Mason reached her. They see us. Avery looked at him. For the first time, neither tried to hide what the words meant. A rescue helicopter arrived less than an hour later. Its blades beat the air above the beach, flattening smoke and sand. A rescue swimmer descended into the surf. Avery wrapped one arm around Mason's waist as they moved toward him. Mason could barely stand. The swimmer examined him quickly. He goes first. Mason's hand closed around Avery's wrist. No. The swimmer leaned closer. Sir, you are in shock. She comes with me. We lift one at a time. Then take her first. Avery shook her head. Mason, stop. His grip tightened. The cold crime boss was gone. There was only the man who had nearly torn himself apart rather than release a rope. I am not leaving you here, he said. You do not get to decide everything. His forehead touched hers. Then decide with me. The helicopter circled above them as another bank of clouds moved across the sea. The rescue swimmer connected a second strap to the harness. Together, he shouted. Mason wrapped his good arm around Avery. The cable tightened. Their feet left the sand. Avery looked down at the beach, the smoke, the shattered aircraft, and the island that had stripped them both down to everything they had tried to hide. Mason pressed his forehead against hers. We leave together. This does not mean I forgive you. I know. But I am not letting go. His eyes closed for 1 second. Neither am I. The helicopter carried them over the water. The island grew smaller beneath them. Ahead, ambulances and black vehicles waited along the mainland landing zone. Avery felt Mason's body change before they touched the ground. His breathing slowed. His face closed. The walls returned one by one. When the doors opened, Walter Briggs stood beyond the medical team with armed men behind him. Mason released Avery's hand. Walter watched the space that opened between them. Then he stepped closer to her. Whatever happened on that island ends here. Walter's words disappeared beneath the roar of the helicopter. Avery looked past him. Paramedics had placed Mason on a stretcher. 3 armed men surrounded him as if the ocean itself might try to take him back. His face had gone pale beneath the harsh lights, but the expression he wore belonged to Boston again. Controlled, distant, unreachable. Only minutes earlier he had refused rescue unless Avery left the island with him. Now he did not look at her as the medical team pushed him toward an ambulance. Walter stepped closer. His expensive coat barely moved in the wind. "You need treatment. So does he. He will receive it." Avery watched the ambulance doors close. "That was not what I meant." Walter's eyes settled on her face. "I know." A paramedic reached for Avery's arm. She let herself be guided toward another vehicle, but she looked back once. The black convoy pulled away first. By the time her ambulance left the landing zone, Mason was already gone. Avery woke beneath white hospital lights. For several seconds, she thought she was inside the aircraft again. The soft hiss of oxygen became the sound of damaged engines. The monitor beside her bed became an alarm. Her hands closed around the blanket as she searched for smoke. Then a familiar voice reached her. "Avery." She turned. Diane sat beside the bed with both hands wrapped around a paper cup. Her face was pale with exhaustion, but she was smiling. Avery tried to sit up. Pain moved through her ribs and leg. Diane placed the cup aside and touched her shoulder. Slowly. "Where is Mason?" The question came before Avery could stop it. Her mother noticed. 2 floors above us. "Is he alive?" "Yes." Avery closed her eyes. The breath she released shook. Diane took her hand. He had surgery on his shoulder and the wound near his ribs. The doctor said the infection was serious, but they caught it in time. "Can I see him?" Diane hesitated. "That may be complicated." "Why?" "There are men outside his room. There are always men outside his room. These men look like they expect a war." Avery looked toward the door. A uniformed officer stood in the hallway speaking with a hospital administrator. Farther down, 2 men in dark suits guarded the elevator. The island had vanished. The danger had not. Avery lifted the blanket. Diane stopped her. "You are not walking anywhere. I need to see him. You need stitches, antibiotics, and rest." "I have stitches. You also have a concussion. I remember everything. That is not proof." Avery looked at her mother. Diane's eyes filled. "You disappeared over the ocean." The words broke something open between them. Avery reached for her. Diane leaned over the bed and held her carefully. For a long moment, Avery was not a woman who had survived fire and storm. She was a daughter who had almost never come home. "I am sorry," Avery whispered. Diane pressed a kiss to her hair. "You came back." Avery looked toward the hallway again. Not everyone had returned. Evan, Caleb, Noah. Their names moved through her mind with the sound of waves. Diane followed her gaze. "You are thinking about him." Avery did not deny it. "He saved me." "And you saved him." That does not make anything simple. Nothing worth understanding usually is. Avery spent the next day answering questions. Federal investigators asked about the technician at the airfield, the explosion, the emergency beacon, and the route change. Coast Guard officers documented the location of the wreckage. Kane Atlantic attorneys entered and left the hospital carrying sealed folders. Avery told them everything except the access code Mason had given her. That truth belonged to a different conversation. Twice she asked to see him. The first time one of his guards told her Mason was asleep. The second time another man said he was in a private meeting. Avery looked through the narrow glass panel in the door. She saw Walter standing near the bed. 2 senior members of the Kane organization sat across from him. Mason was upright, one arm secured against his chest, his face cold and attentive. He turned slightly. For 1 second, Avery believed he saw her. Then Walter stepped into her line of sight. The door remained closed. On the third morning, Walter visited her room. He arrived alone, carrying no flowers. Diane had gone downstairs for coffee. Avery was sitting near the window with her injured leg raised. Walter closed the door. "You are recovering quickly. I have somewhere to be." "New York." Avery looked at him. "I have not decided. You should." He took the chair beside the bed. Avery studied him. "Did Mason send you? No. Then this conversation is already disappointing." Walter rested both hands on the head of his cane. "You spent 6 days in an extreme environment with one other person. You experienced fear, hunger, physical dependence, and repeated threats to your life." "I was there." "Then you understand why judgment can become unreliable." Avery's voice cooled. "Say what you came to say. What you felt on that island may have been real in that place. That does not mean it can survive here." She looked beyond him toward Boston. Cars moved through wet streets. People crossed intersections beneath umbrellas. The city continued as if the ocean had not tried to swallow her. "Are you worried I will hurt Mason?" Walter's expression barely changed. "I am worried he will destroy everything he built to protect you." Avery laughed softly. "Protection. That word follows the Kane family everywhere. You think it is an excuse. I think it becomes one when nobody is allowed to choose." Walter leaned forward. "Mason's enemies do not care about your choices. Grant Holloway knows you survived with him. He knows Mason risked himself for you. Men are already asking why. Let them ask. They will not stop at questions." Avery held his gaze. "What do you want me to do?" "Leave Boston." The answer came without hesitation. "Disappear for a few months. A new apartment. A new position. Security that does not attract attention. Security chosen by whom? By people who understand the threat. That means you. It means Mason." Avery shook her head. "He does not get to send me away. He may not give you another option." "Then he has learned nothing." Walter's mouth tightened. "You believe the island changed him. I believe it showed me who he was without an audience, and I have known him since he was a boy. Then perhaps you helped build the walls." The words landed. Walter looked toward the window. "When Mason was 12, his mother died because someone followed him to her." "I know." His eyes returned to Avery. "He told you?" "Yes. That alone should tell you how unstable his judgment became." "No. It tells me he finally trusted someone." Walter stood. "Trust is a luxury men like Mason cannot afford." Avery looked up at him. "Then men like Mason should stop asking other people to pay the price." Walter walked toward the door. Before leaving, he paused. "If you remain close to him, someone will use you." Avery answered without raising her voice. "I would rather face the truth than be protected by another lie." After he left, Avery found Diane in the hallway carrying 2 cups of coffee and a stack of forms. "The insurance office needs signatures," Diane said. Avery took the papers. Most concerned her own treatment. Beneath them was an old account summary from Diane's surgery. Avery almost set it aside. Then she saw the authorization number. The first letters matched an internal Kane Atlantic code. Her pulse slowed. She turned the page. "Payment source Kane Family Relief Foundation. Authorized through Executive Office Account 1. Avery knew that account. Only Mason and Walter could use it. Diane watched her face. "What is it?" Avery read the date. The payment had been made less than 1 hour after she left Mason's office. He paid it. Diane looked down at the page. "Mason." "Yes." Are you sure Avery was already moving? She ignored the pain in her leg and pushed the hospital room door open. Diane followed. Avery, I need to hear him say it. The guards outside Mason's floor stepped into her path. Miss Collins, Mr. Kane is unavailable. Avery held up the financial statement. He is available now. One guard reached for the door. The other shook his head. Avery stepped between them and entered. Mason sat at the head of a small conference table inside the private suite. Walter stood near the window. Richard Vale's empty chair faced two senior captains Avery recognized from Kane Atlantic events. Conversation stopped. Mason looked at her. For a moment the distance vanished. Then his eyes moved to the document in her hand. He understood. Leave us, he said. Walter did not move. Mason, now. The captain stood. Walter followed them into the hallway. The door closed. Avery placed the document on the table. Say it when you are not burning with fever. Mason looked at the authorization number. I paid it. The room became very quiet. Avery had expected anger to carry her through the moment. Instead, pain returned. You did it the same day? Yes. You arranged everything after I left? Yes. Then you watched me spend a year believing you had abandoned us. Mason rose slowly. His left arm remained secured against his chest. I knew the payment would keep your mother safe. That is not what I asked. No. Why did you never tell me after the investigation moved on? He came around the table. Because by then you hated me. That never stopped you from forcing me onto a plane. It stopped me from asking for anything. Avery stared at him. There it was again, the truth hidden beneath his need for control. She stepped closer. You avoided me after the rescue. Holloway's people attacked the aircraft because someone gave them our route. Every reporter outside this hospital is watching who enters my room. Every rival is watching who matters. You are doing it again. His face tightened. Doing what? Deciding that pushing me away is the same as protecting me. If they know what you are to me, they will use you. What am I to you? The question stopped him. Avery waited. Mason looked toward the door as if even the walls might carry his answer to an enemy. She moved between him and the exit. Do not tell me what Holloway thinks. Do not tell me what Walter thinks. Tell me what I am to you. Mason's breathing changed. When he answered, his voice was low. The first person I have wanted more than I wanted control. Avery felt the words deep beneath her ribs. They were not enough. Not yet. Then prove it. How? Give me a choice. His eyes stayed on hers. Avery continued. I am leaving Kane Atlantic. Mason went still. I have already submitted my resignation. To whom? Human resources. You should have given it to me. That is exactly why I did not. A shadow of frustration moved across his face. What will you do? I have an interview with a forensic accounting firm in New York. No. The word came instantly. Avery stepped back. Mason closed his eyes. When he opened them, the command had disappeared. I do not want you to leave. That is different. It does not feel different. It is. He looked at the document on the table. What do you need from me? The question was difficult for him. Avery could hear it. Honesty. What else, Space? Pain moved through his expression. He did not hide it quickly enough. You have it, he said. She nodded. If you come after me with armed men threats or another secret plan for my safety, we are finished. Mason's gaze remained steady. What if I come alone? Avery moved toward the door. Then I might open it. The investigation moved quickly after that. The Coast Guard recovered pieces of the aircraft beacon. Federal agents confirmed the wires had been cut before the crash. Caldera Aviation Services disappeared from its registered address. The technician from the airfield was found in Baltimore using another name. Avery gave copies of the financial records to an independent attorney. Mason did not ask her to return them. That mattered. 3 days after she left the hospital, Mason called a council meeting at Kane Atlantic headquarters. Walter sat on his right. 6 captains filled the conference table. Senior executives occupied the remaining chairs. Richard Vale stood near the far wall with 2 guards behind him. Mason entered last. His arm remained in a support, but he wore the dark suit again. The city knew this version of him. The difference was in his eyes. He placed Avery's report on the table. Richard approved the payments to Caldera Aviation. Richard shook his head. The codes were copied. Mason opened another folder. The access records came from your office computer. Someone used my credentials. You contacted a Holloway broker 4 times during the month before the flight. That was port business. You sold the route. Richard looked around the room. No one defended him. Mason's voice remained calm. 3 men died. I did not know they would attack the plane. You knew enough to accept the money. Richard turned toward Walter. This organization has rules. Walter looked away. Mason signaled to the guards. They removed Richard from the room. The door closed behind him. One captain spoke. Holloway will assume we are weakened. Mason sat. Holloway assumed that before the crash. Walter placed both hands on the table. There is another issue. Mason looked at him. Avery Collins. Silence spread through the room. Walter continued. People know she was with you. They know you refused extraction without her. If she remains close, every rival will understand what she represents. And what does she represent? Mason asked. Walter's expression hardened. A vulnerability. Mason looked around the table. Several men avoided his eyes. One captain leaned forward. Are you willing to risk this organization for one woman? Mason placed his good hand over Avery's report. On that island, money could not make water. My name could not make fire. Fear could not pull me from a cliff. No one moved. She identified the payment trail before anyone in this room. She found the evidence that exposed Richard. She saved my life when leaving me beneath burning metal would have been easier. Walter's voice was quiet. That does not change what enemies will do. No. Then deny the relationship. Send her somewhere safe. Mason looked at the man who had helped raise him. My father lost everything because he let love become visible, Walter said. Mason's expression changed. My father lost everything because he mistook fear for strength. Walter stared at him. Mason continued. I spent most of my life making people feel disposable so no one would notice when they mattered. That ends now. The captain across from him shifted. Are you choosing her over the family I am choosing not to become the man who taught me love was something to punish? Silence held the room. Mason looked at each person in turn. If any man here believes honesty makes me weak, he is free to test the theory. No one spoke. That evening, rain moved across South Boston. Avery stood in her bedroom, packing clothes into an open suitcase. Her interview in New York was scheduled for Monday. A black sedan stopped outside. She looked through the window. Mason stepped onto the sidewalk alone. No guards followed. No second vehicle waited at the corner. The front bell rang. Diane opened the door before Avery reached the hall. Mason stood on the landing holding a small evidence bag. Diane studied him. You came alone. Yes. That must be uncomfortable. It is unfamiliar. She led him inside. Mason removed his coat. He looked different without men around him. Still dangerous, still controlled, but less protected by the performance of power. He faced Diane. I owe you an apology. Diane folded her arms. That is a beginning. Mason glanced toward Avery, then returned his attention to her mother. I paid for the surgery because I could. I hid it because I was afraid the people watching me would use you. I spoke to your daughter with cruelty because cruelty was easier for me than honesty. He paused. None of that excuses what I did. Diane watched him carefully. Do you love her? Mason looked at Avery. Yes. Then stop trying to make her decisions. His answer came without resistance. I am learning. Diane stepped aside. The hallway is yours. Avery followed Mason outside. Rain tapped against the windows at the end of the corridor. He gave her the evidence bag. Inside was a scorched piece of metal from the aircraft. Avery looked at it. I kept it, Mason said, because that was the day I lost everything that made me untouchable. She turned the metal beneath the light. You were never untouchable. No, you were unreachable. His eyes held hers. Then it was the day you reached me. Avery closed her fingers around the bag. I may leave Boston. I know. You are not going to stop me. The old Mason would have offered money, security, influence, or a threat disguised as concern. This man stood with one arm still healing and both hands visible. No. Avery searched his face. What happens if I choose New York? I let you go. And if I stay, I ask what you want. Then I listen. She stepped closer. No secrets about threats. Agreed. No guards unless we discuss them. His jaw tightened. Agreed. I will never work beneath you again. You should not. You do not get to use fear money or obligation to keep me. I will not. I am not forgiving everything tonight. I know. And I will not become an excuse for you to continue hurting people. Mason looked toward the rain. When he answered, his voice was quiet. I cannot promise I will become a different man in one day. I would not believe you if you did. I can promise that I will not disappear behind silence. Avery looked at the piece of metal between them. That is a start. She touched his face. Mason became perfectly still. The first time they had almost kissed, he had stepped away and called the island unreal. This time there was no fire, no storm, no fear of dying before sunrise. Avery kissed him because she chose to. Mason's good hand moved to her waist. He held her carefully. Not like a possession, like an answer he had no right to demand. 3 weeks later, Boston Harbor shone beneath a clear evening sky. Avery walked along a quiet pier carrying 2 cups of coffee. Mason waited near the railing. His shoulder was healing. The support was gone, though he still moved carefully. The black suits had returned, but the wall behind his eyes no longer closed every time she approached. She handed him a cup. For me, for reception. He looked around the empty pier. I see. Avery smiled. Her new forensic consulting firm occupied a small office near the financial district. She had declined the New York position. Not for Mason, for herself. Boston was her home, and leaving out of fear would still have allowed dangerous men to choose her future. Kane Atlantic had hired her firm to review its legal operations through an independent contract. Every condition appeared in writing. Mason had objected to none of them. He handed her a small glass frame. Inside was the scorched metal from the aircraft. A metal plate beneath it carried 4 engraved words. The day control failed. Avery looked at him. That is dramatic, even for you. What would you call it? She took a pen from her bag and wrote beneath the plate. The day you became reachable. Mason read the words. Avery expected a clever response. Instead, he took her hand. Cargo ships moved through the harbor. Cranes stood dark against the sinking sun. Behind them, Boston continued to make noise, money, and trouble. The danger had not vanished. Neither had the wounds. Mason still carried a criminal empire on his shoulders. Avery still woke some nights hearing metal tear beneath dark water. trust did not arrive all at once. It came through smaller things. A question instead of an order. A truth offered before it was demanded. A hand held without closing into a cage. Mason looked toward the harbor. "Are you still thinking about New York?" Avery rested her head against his shoulder. "Ask me tomorrow." His fingers tightened gently around hers. "I will." The last light caught the metal inside the frame. 6 days on an island had not rescued them from who they were. It had only made hiding impossible, and when the wreckage was gone, when fear no longer made every decision, they stood beside each other because neither had been forced to stay.